So Dana and Grant, they encountered one of my sculptures at a pizzeria joint at Rosso Pizza. It was sitting outside of the cafe pizza place. So it was before it was Rosso, it was DiCapo, and Antonio had bought a sculpture from me for credit, like coffee credit. So I had a card full of coffee credit, and it was in the thousands.
Yeah. For a while.
And I went through it very, very, very quickly. So he had bought a sculpture from my undergrad, and it was sitting outside of his cafe. And then he told me one time that some folks had seen it and wanted my number, and was it okay if I gave him my number? So I said, of course. He said yes, and he passed it on, and I received an email from Dana, and she expressed interest in my sculpture and in my studio, and was very complimentary and said she would like to maybe explore the option of what might be available to acquire. They came to the studio I think it must have been the same day as the Alberta Foundation for the Arts came to the studio looking to acquire a sculpture too. And the committee and Dana and Grant chose the same sculpture. So I had to navigate this sort of difficult situation but the Alberta Foundation for the Arts was just going to store the sculpture, and Dana and Grant were going to display it. So I gave them preference on buying the sculpture from me. And she and Grant have a beautiful old clinker brick, 110-year-old house over in the Strathcona area. It looks beautiful in front of their yard too. It's in the front of their yard. A few years later, they got back a hold of me and said, we've got our oil boiler from the house has failed, and it's now time for us to renovate the entire house. So we've taken it all out, and we'd like you to come and look and see whether you could make a sculpture out of these boiler parts. So I went and checked it out, and I agreed. I said, yes, I could probably build a sculpture out of these. There's all kinds of intricacies of welding cast iron with mild steel, but that's my job, my problem, not theirs. And the shapes are big canisters, so I have to make a sculpture out of these barrels. And my work often has much more fluid kind of things going on than just these strictly round shapes in it. But I fairly quickly had a thought of what I wanted to do as far as stacking them and building them. And so I said, okay, but my caveat was, we agreed on a price. I just said, except that it's going to take a year. It's going to take me a year to make this sculpture. And they said, that's okay, our renovation's going to take at least a year, and then we have to do landscaping, so that'll work out fine. Well, as it turned out, their renovation took over 2 years, and the landscaping wasn't done for another 6 months after that. But they did come to check out the progress on the sculpture after about a year, and they came in, and Dana almost didn't want to come into the studio. Like, she was like that nervous that they maybe had made a mistake, or that I knew, having known that it was going to be a longer period, I knew that I'd have a lot more time to kind of develop the sculpture and to sculpt it and really form it, shape it. And so I was a little nervous that they were going to not like it too, or it was going to appear unfinished, because it really was unfinished. And she came in and she just about started crying. She liked it so much. She was really anxious and nervous, and ended up just almost weeping with just pleasure and joy at seeing the sculpture that they were going to get. That was really the reason that they wanted this commission piece was that they wanted to, with this heritage house, they wanted to keep these heritage parts of the house in the yard, and they wanted them to be made into art, and that's kind of what I did. So then a year and a half after that, so 2.5 years total, I finished the sculpture and picked it and hauled it, and it was probably the heaviest, densest sculpture I've ever made. It was probably, I think of these ones as being kind of poses or postures, or partial torsos, or that kind of thing. And this one wasn't really so figurative. It was a little more abstract and a little bit more geometrical because of those barrel shapes stacked on top of one another and arranged in a little bit. It's maybe a little more flower-like or plant-like, but dense and heavy. And so they've got a large sculpture in the front of the yard and a large sculpture in the back of their yard. And they're still looking at maybe acquiring another smaller one for inside. So they're real patrons. It's really nice to have that kind of it's amazing to have that kind of support. And that's the story of Homebody.